This is the story of Leonard Allen Price and his wife Claire Renee Price. They had built something that looked, from the outside, like a life. 14 years of shared meals and separate silences, of inside jokes that had calcified into habit, of two people who had once reached for each other in the dark and now simply slept on their respective sides of a California king. The tension between them was never the kind that announced itself. No thrown dishes, no screaming matches in the driveway. It was the kind that accumulated in small withdrawals. A question not asked, a door closed softly when it might once have been left open. Leonard had confused Claire's steadiness for contentment, and Claire had confused her own patience for strength. What unraveled between them was not love exactly, but the long, quiet fiction they had both agreed to maintain and the separate plans each had made when they finally stopped believing in it. The kitchen in the Price home smelled like coffee and dish soap every morning at 7, and Leonard had come to understand this as a kind of love, or at least a reasonable substitute for it. Claire moved through the kitchen with the economy of someone who had performed the same motions 10,000 times. She did not slam cabinets or sigh heavily. She simply existed in the space with a competence that Leonard had over the years. Stop noticing the way you stop noticing a painting on a wall. She poured his coffee, black, 2 sugars, and set it at his place at the island without being asked, without comment, without looking up from the folder she was reading. "Morning," Leonard said. "Morning," she said. He sat down. She remained standing, turning a page. This was their choreography. It had its own beauty, maybe, if you were the kind of person who found beauty in precision. Leonard was not that kind of person, or he had not been once, though he could no longer remember exactly when he had stopped being that person, or what had replaced him. He was 51 years old, the kind of man who had grown into his face, strong jaw gone slightly soft, silver coming in at the temples in a way that his colleagues called distinguished, and his wife no longer seemed to notice. He was CEO of Hartwell Industrial, a mid-sized manufacturing firm that his father had built and that Leonard had expanded, and he wore this backed with the quiet authority of a man who had never seriously been required to question himself. He was not cruel. He was not dishonest, exactly. He was the particular kind of man who had been told he was exceptional so consistently and from such an early age that he had simply incorporated it as fact, the way you incorporate the color of your own eyes. Claire set the folder down and finally looked at him. She was 47, and her face still did what it had always done, composed itself into a kind of careful attentiveness that people sometimes mistook for warmth and sometimes mistook for coldness, and was actually, Leonard had come to understand, simply vigilance. She had grown up with a father who shifted without warning, and she had learned early to read rooms before entering them. It was a skill that had served her professionally. She had her own consulting practice, quiet and prestigious, advising mid-market firms on restructuring, and it was a skill that had, over the years, made her very difficult to surprise. "You have the Bergman call at 9, she said. "I moved your Thursday lunch with Marcus to Friday because of your flight. You didn't have to do that." "I know." She picked up her own coffee. Outside, their neighbor's dog barked twice, then went quiet. This was also their choreography. Their daughter Nora had left for college 2 years ago, and the house had shifted in her absence in ways that neither Leonard nor Claire had anticipated, and neither had fully articulated. It was not that they had nothing to say to each other. They had plenty to say. Logistics and schedules and the minor administrative details of a shared life. It was that the things they had to say had become, almost without their noticing, entirely functional. They discussed the house, their finances, their calendars. They did not discuss how either of them was doing. The question had stopped being asked somewhere around year 9 or 10, and by the time either of them noticed its absence had itself become normal. Their secondary character arrived, as secondary characters often do, in the form of a phone call. Marcus Webb had been Leonard's closest friend since business school. Blunt, loyal, occasionally exhausting in the way of men who have strong opinions and weak filters. He called while Leonard was driving to the office, and his voice had the careful quality of someone choosing words. "Dinner this week? Just us. Me to talk to you about something." "Talk to me now," Leonard said. "No," Marcus said. "Not now." The call ended, and Leonard drove the rest of the way to the office with the faint, unnamed unease of a man who has been handed a sentence without its conclusion. That evening, Leonard found Claire in the study. Not their shared study, but hers, the small room off the hallway that she had claimed when Nora left. The door was open, but only partially. She was on a call, her voice low and composed, and she did not look up when he appeared in the doorway. He stood there for a moment, long enough to register that she was not going to look up, and then he went to bed. He lay in the dark and listened to the house settle around him, and he thought, without urgency or alarm, the way a man thinks about a weather forecast. Something is shifting. He did not know, lying there, what it was. He did not know that Claire, in her study, was reviewing documents that she had been reviewing for 6 months, quietly, the way she did everything, with patience, with precision, and with a goal she had not yet shared with anyone. He fell asleep before she came to bed. She did not come to bed at all that night. Marcus chose the Italian place on Halstead that they'd been going to since their 30s, and he arrived before Leonard, which was unusual enough that Leonard noticed it. He was already working on his second piece of bread when Leonard sat down, and he pushed the basket across the table with the slightly aggressive hospitality of a man who is stalling. "You're going to tell me something I don't want to hear," Leonard said. "I'm going to tell you something that's probably none of my business," Marcus said, "but that's never stopped me before." The waiter came. They ordered. The restaurant was half full, warm with candlelight and the low acoustic murmur of other people's conversations. And Leonard felt, as he sometimes did in restaurants, the peculiar comfort of being temporarily anonymous. Marcus set down his bread. "How are you and Claire?" Leonard considered the question with the deliberateness of a man who has considered it before and not arrived anywhere satisfying. "Fine," he said. "We're fine. That's a word," Marcus said. "It's an accurate word." "Is it?" Leonard looked at him. "What did you hear?" "Nothing I can source," Marcus said. And this was both reassuring and not. Just, you know how things circulate. "I heard she's been spending more time with the Hartwell people, some of the board periphery." Leonard was quiet for a moment. "She has clients in that space. She's always had contacts there." "I know," Marcus said. "I'm probably wrong." But he had said probably, not definitely, and both of them understood the difference. The conversation shifted to Marcus's kids, to a development in the city's zoning, to things that required no particular emotional investment, and Leonard made himself participate in it with the outward ease of a man who was not thinking about anything. He had developed this skill over years of boardrooms and negotiations, the ability to be present and absent simultaneously, to maintain the surface while something else moved underneath. Later in the car, he thought about what Marcus had said. He thought about Claire's closed study door, about the calls he overheard without hearing, about the way she had been, lately, almost more present than she'd been in years. Not warmer, not colder, but somehow more there, more alert, as though she was paying attention to something he couldn't see. He thought about the last time they had spoken, really spoken, about something that mattered to either of them. He could not locate the memory precisely. It had been years, he thought, maybe longer than years. Inside the same marriage, Claire was in her study 2 nights later, and she was frequently aware in those months, of the particular quality of the house's silence. Leonard was home. She could hear the television in the other room, the low murmur of a news program he watched without really watching. And she held the sound in her peripheral awareness, the way you hold a sound that might be significant but hasn't announced itself yet. She was reading a proxy agreement. She set it down and looked at the wall, the thing that people did not understand about Claire, the thing she had stopped trying to explain, because explaining it required a vocabulary she'd found most people didn't have, was that she had not stopped loving Leonard so much as she had stopped believing that he saw her. Not her performance of competence and steadiness and logistical grace. Her the woman underneath the choreography who had needs and fears and a recurring dream about a house she couldn't find the exit of. She had tried, once, to tell him this. It had been year 7, maybe year 8, and she had been uncharacteristically direct. I feel like you see everything I do and nothing I am. And Leonard had looked at her with genuine puzzlement and said, I don't know what that means, Claire. I'm here every day. What more do you want? And she had said, never mind, because she couldn't answer the question without crying. And she did not cry in front of Leonard, had not in years. Not because he was unkind when she cried, but because he was at a loss. He would reach for her shoulder and hold it like he was trying to do something correct, and the awkward goodness of the gesture was somehow worse than nothing. So she had said never mind and made him coffee in the morning and continued. She was not entirely without fault in this, she understood that. Her self-sufficiency had, over time, made it easy for Leonard to believe she needed nothing. She had presented a face of such competence that he had eventually stopped looking for cracks, and she had been, in the private chambers of her own heart, furious at him for stopping, even as she recognized that she had helped to lay the floor he stood on. She picked up her phone and sent a brief email to her attorney. Confirm the filing timeline for Monday. She put the phone down. From the other room, the television murmured. She looked at the wall for a moment and said, quietly, mostly to herself, though there was no one in the room to hear, I don't know. Maybe like this story, or subscribe or something. She blinked as though surprised by her own voice. She glanced toward the door, half expecting Leonard or someone to have heard. No one appeared. She shook her head almost imperceptibly, the way you shake off a thought that doesn't belong, and returned to the document. They had dinner together that Friday, one of their weekly dinners, a habit they had maintained with the determination of people committed to the appearance of a functioning thing. Claire had made pasta. Leonard opened wine. They sat at the table and the candles burned down between them, and they talked about Nora's semester and the contractor who was supposed to fix the guest bathroom, and a restaurant that Claire's colleague had recommended. Somewhere in the middle of the meal, Leonard said, Are you happy? Claire looked at him. The question was unusual enough that it registered on her face before she could arrange it otherwise. A flicker of something, surprise or sorrow or both. Why? She said. Marcus said something, Leonard said, and then I couldn't stop thinking about it. Are you happy? Are you okay? Claire cut a piece of pasta and ate it. She was quiet long enough that it became its own answer. I'm managing, she said. That's not what I asked. I know, she said. But it's what I have. The candles burned. Leonard looked at his plate. He had the feeling, brief and quickly suppressed, of a man who is asked a question he cannot act on and now has to live with the knowledge it produced. He did not ask a follow-up question. She did not offer one. They finished the meal and cleared the table and went to their separate sides of the California King, and the house settled around them with the unhurried patience of a structure that has heard everything and remembers nothing. The papers arrived on a Thursday morning in March. Leonard was standing at the island with his coffee, black, 2 sugars, poured by his own hand because Claire was not there, when the courier came. He signed without thinking. He read the cover page twice before the words resolved into meaning, and even then the meaning came slowly, as though arriving through fog. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Claire Renee Price. Petitioner. He set the papers on the counter. He finished his coffee. He called his office and told them he would be late. Claire came home at noon. She had known he would be home. He had texted her, simply, "Can we talk?" And she had responded, "Yes, noon." And that was the whole of the arrangement. She found him in the living room, which they almost never used, sitting in the chair by the window with his hands in his lap. She sat on the couch across from him. They looked at each other. How long? He said. I filed Monday, she said. I've been thinking about it much longer. How much longer? She considered the question honestly. 2 years, maybe, in the background, and then more seriously in the last several months. Leonard nodded slowly, the nod of a man absorbing something he did not want to absorb. His face was doing something complicated. She could see it, the effort of a man who had very little practice being caught off guard, trying to locate the appropriate response. I want to understand what I did, he said. You didn't do anything, Claire said. And then, because that wasn't quite honest, you didn't do one thing. There's no one thing. That's less helpful than you might think. I know. She folded her hands in her lap. Leonard, you know how we are. You know what we've been for. I don't know, for years. You came home every night. You were never cruel. You provided. You were present, technically. But you stopped wondering about me a long time ago. You stopped being curious about me as a person. I became infrastructure. His jaw tightened. That's not fair. I know it doesn't feel fair, she said. But ask yourself the last time you asked me something about me. Not logistics, not Nora, not the house, about me. He opened his mouth, closed it. She watched him work through it, the protest forming and then failing, because he was, underneath everything, an honest man. An honest man cannot sustain a lie when confronted with the specific evidence of it. I thought you were fine, he said finally. I thought you never said anything was wrong. You always seemed, I know, she said. I know. I make it easy not to ask. That's not entirely my fault then. No, she said. It's not entirely yours. I know my part in this. She said it without rancor, without the edge of a woman assigning blame. She said it like someone who had spent a long time in a room with a hard truth and had finally arranged it into a shape she could carry. They were quiet for a while. Is there someone else? He asked. No, she said. He believed her. He did not know why exactly, perhaps because she said it the way she said things that were simply true without elaboration or emphasis. What happens next? He said. Attorneys, she said. Division of assets. You know the broad shape of it. He looked at her. Something in his face shifted. Not collapse, not anger, but the particular grief of a man who has realized that the thing he thought was solid was already gone when he touched it. I want you to be represented well, he said. I'm not going to make this difficult. Claire looked at him for a moment, and something moved across her face that was almost tenderness. I appreciate that, she said. She stood up to leave, and then stopped at the doorway. Leonard, she said. He looked up. I didn't stop caring about you. I want you to know that. I got tired of being invisible, that's the whole of it. He did not say anything. She went upstairs, and he sat by the window, alone, with the afternoon light moving slowly across the floor. The months that followed had the strange, suspended quality of a life between lives. Leonard moved into the Whitmore Hotel for 2 weeks before his attorney found him a rental. A sleek, depersonalized apartment downtown with good light and no history. The kind of space that asks nothing of you and gives nothing back. He furnished it with the practical efficiency of a man completing a task. He bought a bed, a couch, a kitchen table. He did not buy anything on the walls for 3 months. He told people, colleagues, acquaintances, the broad periphery of his social world, that it was mutual, amicable, a decision they'd arrived at together. This was not entirely false. He told Marcus the fuller version. They'd simply grown apart, different people than they'd been. The marriage had run its course. Did you know it was coming? Marcus asked. I should have, Leonard said. It was the most honest thing he said in those months. At work, he was the same, decisive, composed, carrying the firm with the particular authority that came from never having had it publicly questioned. The Hartwell board was in transition, some peripheral restructuring that his general counsel was handling. He didn't pay it close attention. He was distracted, more than he would have admitted, by the quiet interior project of understanding how a man could spend 14 years in a marriage and miss its unraveling. He thought about what Claire had said. You stopped being curious about me. He rotated this phrase in his mind at odd moments, in the elevator, before sleep, during long meetings where his attention wandered. He tried to argue against it. He had been curious about her. He had asked about her work, her clients, her ideas. Hadn't he? He tried to construct specific memories. They came, some of them, but they were old, From the early years, the years when they were still discovering each other with the greedy attention of new love. From the middle years, the memories were softer, less specific. He could recall her presence, but not her particulars, the topics of conversations, the content of her days. He had known, he realized, what she did. He had not known what she thought about it. He had known her schedule, but not her interior. He had known the facts of her life, but not the texture of it. This distinction, arriving slowly over weeks, was more uncomfortable than he would have expected. Claire, for her part, was reshaping. She had expected the separation to feel like loss, and it did. Not the catastrophic loss she had braced for, but a quieter, more complex grief, the kind that visits without announcing itself and stays longer than makes sense. She had lunch with her friend Diane, who had been divorced twice and wore this fact with the authority of expertise. And Diane said, "You'll feel better once the papers are done." And Claire nodded and said nothing because she understood that Diane needed her to feel better once the papers were done. And this was not the same as it being true. She did feel clearer. That much was accurate. There was a quality of air in her own space, even now, still in the house until the settlement was finalized, that she had not felt in years, as though she had been holding her breath so gradually, over so long that she'd stopped recognizing breathlessness as its own condition. Her work intensified in the best way. She took on 2 new clients, both restructuring engagements, both requiring the particular attention she gave to problems that required patience and precision, and the willingness to move through complexity without rushing to resolution. She did not talk about Leonard with Diane or her other friends. Not really. Not in the way she might have. She talked around him, the practicalities, the progress of the settlement, Nora's reaction. Nora had cried on the phone, then been practical, then called her brother-in-law, who was a family attorney, which was very Nora. But the interior thing, the marriage itself and what it had been and how it had failed, that she kept private. It felt wrong to make it into a story someone else could consume. She was, in this, still protecting something. She was not sure what exactly. Perhaps Leonard's dignity, perhaps her own, perhaps the marriage itself, which had been real, once, in ways that deserved more than anecdote. There was the other matter, the financial matter, which her attorney was handling. Claire had spent the better part of the previous year, quietly and with the methodical patience that was her particular genius, acquiring shares in Hartwell Industrial through a series of subsidiaries, careful, legal, undisclosed, building a position that her attorney had told her was remarkable in its construction. She had not built it out of spite. She had built it because Leonard had spent years dismissing her understanding of business with the light condescension of a man who does not realize he is condescending, and she had wanted, if things came to what they had come to be in a position of clarity. The power she held was not a weapon. She thought of it more as ballast, the certainty that she would not be diminished in the proceedings, would not be managed or minimized or handled. She had not anticipated the extent of it mattering. The mediation had been civil, almost cordially so, until Leonard's attorney made the argument that Claire's consulting business, which had grown significantly during the marriage, was a derivative asset, something built on the connections and infrastructure of Leonard's professional world. Leonard had not objected. He had sat there and not objected, which was not the same as agreeing, but close enough. And then Claire's attorney had set the documentation on the table. The room had gone very quiet. The courtroom was smaller than it appeared in the imagination. Leonard had been in conference rooms for 30 years, had chaired thousands of meetings in spaces designed to confer authority, and there was something deliberately underwhelming about the domestic courtroom, the low ceiling, the fluorescent light, the acoustic tile. It was a room designed to accommodate the ordinary devastation of ordinary lives, and it did this, he thought, with a certain civic dignity. He sat at the table to the left. Claire sat at the table to the right. Between them, the 6 feet of carpeted floor had the quality of something formal and enormous, a distance traveled over years. He had known, going in, that the financial situation was more complex than his attorneys had initially represented. He had known, in the 3 days since the mediation documents had been presented, what Claire had done. What he had not anticipated was the specific geometry of it. Claire had not acquired some shares. She had, through patient, methodical accumulation over 11 months, achieved controlling interest in Hartwell Industrial's parent holding company, a position so precisely assembled that his own legal team had spent 48 hours verifying it before calling him. His attorney had been careful in the phone call. She didn't do anything unlawful. It's completely above board. But the position she holds, I understand what a controlling position means, Leonard said. There are clauses, his attorney said, in your leadership agreement. If the controlling interest changes hands, I know the clauses, Leonard said, and he did know them. He had negotiated them himself years ago to protect against hostile acquisition. He had never imagined they would apply to his wife. He had sat with this for 3 days, not with rage. The rage had been brief and had exhausted itself quickly. Like a fire in a small room, what remained after the rage was something more difficult, more unflattering. The recognition that he had spent a year in the same house as this woman, sleeping 10 feet from her, eating dinner across from her twice a week, and had not seen any of it, had not known, had looked and seen only his comfortable projection of her. In the courtroom, the proceedings moved through their formal choreography. Leonard's attorney made his arguments, which were not, now, arguments about leverage, but about settlement terms, about a man negotiating from a position he had not understood was diminished. Claire's attorney laid out the financial documentation with the unhurried precision of someone who has prepared for a long time. Leonard did not perform. He had been advised by his attorney to project confidence, to maintain the composed authority that had served him in every professional setting for 3 decades. He understood this advice. He did not take it. When the judge asked if either party wished to make a statement before the terms were formalized, Leonard's attorney said no. Claire's attorney looked at Claire, who shook her head slightly, and then the judge moved on, and the terms were read. And Leonard listened to the financial architecture of the next phase of his life, arranged by a woman he had once poured coffee for every morning without thinking about what she was thinking. It was not a punishing settlement. He retained the house. She did not want it. She retained the consulting business, unencumbered. The Hartwell situation was addressed through a financial arrangement his attorneys had negotiated, which would preserve his position for the next 18 months while a transition was managed. He was not removed, not yet, but the structural reality of his standing had changed in a way that everyone in that room understood, and that would eventually, quietly, be reflected in the way boards speak when they mean to be polite about ending something. They left the courthouse at the same time by accident, their attorneys diverging at the door, and Leonard and Claire suddenly standing on the steps in the afternoon light. It was April. The city was doing the thing it does in April. The faint insistence of warmth after cold, the particular quality of new light. Claire had her coat over her arm. She was looking toward the street, not at him, and then she looked at him because he was there. "How are you?" she said. It was such an ordinary question that it caught him off guard, the way ordinary things do when they arrive in extraordinary contexts. "I don't know yet," he said. She nodded, as though this was reasonable. Because it was. He looked at her in the April light. He tried to say something adequate and did not find it. What he found instead was what he should perhaps have found years ago, in the kitchen, or at the dinner table, or on any of the 100 evenings he had sat across from her and spoken without speaking, the recognition that she had been, for a long time, trying to be known, and that he had not been trying to know her. He had been trying to maintain the picture of what he understood, which is not the same thing, and the difference between them is the entire width of what they had lost. "I should have asked more," he said. She was quiet for a moment. "I should have said more," she said. "I made it easy for you not to." It was not forgiveness. It was not the kind of statement that resolves anything or closes the gap or makes the 14 years into a coherent shape. It was just a true thing, said by 2 people who had finally arrived at the same room, too late to live in it, but in time at least to see it clearly. "Take care of yourself, Leonard," she said. "You too," he said. She walked toward the waiting car, and he stood on the courthouse steps in the April light, and he watched her go. And there was in him a feeling that was not quite grief and not quite relief, but something that lived in the territory between them, the particular weight of understanding arriving after the understanding could change anything. He stood there for a long time. The city moved around him with its ordinary insistence. He thought about the kitchen, the coffee, the folder she'd been reading. He thought about all the mornings he had sat across from her and spoken in logistical shorthand and called it presence, called it enough, called it fine. He thought about how much you could be in a room with someone and still be absent from them, how you could touch a person's life 1,000 times and never quite reach it. After a while, he walked down the steps and into the city, into the unremarkable afternoon, into the next version of himself that he had not yet figured out how to be. Behind him, the courthouse stood as it always had, small and fluorescent and quietly enormous, holding the ordinary weight of ordinary endings. Ahead of him, the street, and no clear picture of what came next. And, for the first time in a long time, the knowledge that the not knowing was entirely his own.